In the middle of a freezing 15-degree winter night, the man I once called husband looked straight into my eyes and coldly uttered, "Leave everything behind and get out of here immediately." I didn't cry, nor did I beg. Silently, I donned my late father's worn-out coat, clutched the 7-month-old fetus in my womb, and walked straight out into the swirling snowstorm. They thought they had taken everything and driven my child and me to the brink of ruin. But they didn't know that this old coat held a terrifying secret capable of overthrowing an entire family empire. The moment I returned. "I'm so grateful you chose to spend your time here. Now tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country? Let's see how far this reaches." Also, please note this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and thoughtful purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or locations is purely coincidental, but the truth inside it is worth your attention. The files were in a folder labeled Q4 Reconciliation, which was the kind of name designed to be ignored. I found them on a Tuesday evening in February, 3 days before Valentine's Day, while Julian was at what he called a dinner meeting. I was not looking for anything. I had forgotten the Wi-Fi password and needed his laptop. What I found instead was a folder inside a folder inside a folder, the kind of nested structure that is either very organized or very hidden. When you are a trained accountant who spent 6 years auditing mid-sized corporations, you know immediately which one it is. I opened the first file, then the second, then I stopped and sat very still for a long time. $31 million, 6 years. 4 shell companies registered in Delaware, Nevada, and the Cayman Islands, timed to coincide with quarterly filings in a pattern invisible to anyone not looking and immediately obvious to anyone who was. I did not finish counting. I closed the laptop, put it back exactly where I found it, went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water, and stood at the sink looking out at the snow that had been falling since noon. I was still standing there when Julian's key turned in the lock. He came in, unwinding his scarf, already talking about the roads, about something his father had said, and then he stopped. Because I was in the kitchen doorway with the glass of water in my hand, and something in the way I was standing told him the evening had changed. "Everything okay?" he asked. The way you ask when you already know the answer is no. I told him I had used his laptop to find the Wi-Fi password. The change in his face was very small, a tightening around the eyes. Something more calculated than guilt. He said he needed to make a call, walked into the study, and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen listening to the low murmur of his voice through the wall, not frightened, making arrangements. Charles and Victoria Sterling arrived 23 minutes later. Victoria walked in and looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they are about to solve. Charles nodded at Julian. Not words, just acknowledgement between men who have already spoken and know what comes next. Victoria told me what I had found was none of my concern, that the wisest thing I could do was hand over the passwords and conduct myself as though the evening had not happened. I told her I had only looked. I had not copied anything. 4 minutes later, they had taken everything. My phone, my wallet, my keys, my jewelry, every object in that house that I had believed was mine. When they opened the front door, the cold came in immediately. 15 degrees. Victoria looked at the old coat I was wearing. My father's coat, navy blue, a small silver star on the collar, with the eyes of someone looking at something that does not matter. "That old thing," she said. "Keep it." The door closed behind me. I put one hand on my stomach, 7 months along, and I began to walk. The cold hit my lungs like broken glass. 3 steps from the front door and my body was already screaming, fingers curling into fists inside the thin wool pockets, ears burning, throat raw with every breath. The coat was 30 years old, and it was losing the fight against 15 degrees and a February wind off Lake Michigan that came at you like it had decided you personally. But my father had given it to me before he died. So I walked. My mind drifted back to 20 years ago, 3 months before my wedding. He had called me into the kitchen of the small house on Cranfield Avenue where I grew up, the house with the crooked back step and the radiator that clanked every night at 2 in the morning like it was trying to tell you something. He was standing at the counter with the coat folded over his arm, smiling the way he smiled when he was proud of something but did not want to make a production of it. "Dad," I said, laughing, "that thing is ancient." 30 years old, he said, completely unbothered. "Good wool doesn't age, it just gets honest." He held it out. "I took it because you did not refuse things Arthur Vance offered you with that particular look on his face. The look that meant this mattered even if he wasn't going to explain why." I turned the coat over and noticed the star on the collar. 5-point silver thread so small you would miss it if you weren't looking. "What's this?" I asked. He touched it gently with one finger. "So the right people will know," he said. "Know what?" He held the coat open for me to slip my arms in, and when I turned around, he put both hands on my shoulders and squeezed once firm, certain. "It will be necessary," he said. "Just that." I laughed out loud. "Daddy, you're being dramatic." He grinned wide and warm, the grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Maybe," he said. "Wear it anyway." 8 months later, he was gone, killed in the line of duty. A report that explained very little, a funeral that answered nothing, and 20 years of questions that nobody in any official capacity ever saw fit to address. Now walking through February snow with the wind finding every gap in 30-year-old wool, my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. I pressed my hand harder against my stomach. The baby pushed back alive, warm, furious in her small way at being moved through a storm at this hour. Hot tears burned down my cheeks and froze before they reached my jaw. I was crying so hard my ribs hurt, grief and rage and exhaustion arriving all at once, with nowhere left to go. "I'm sorry, baby," I said out loud. "I'm going to fix this. I promise." She kicked, hard, twice. Through the snow ahead, a yellow light appeared. The bus stops at 55th and Halsted. I started to run. The bus stop had a pole and a sign. No shelter, no bench, no glass panel to break the wind, just metal planted in cracked concrete, and a schedule that bore only a passing relationship to when the buses actually arrived. I had 87 cents in my coat pocket, 3/4 a dime, 2 pennies counted twice, as if counting again might change the result. The fare was $2. I stood there and did the math, and then I stood there some more. The baby pressed against my ribs from the inside, slow and insistent. I pressed back with 2 fingers. "I know," I whispered. "We're going to be okay." I did not know if that was true, but I said it because she needed to hear it, and because I needed to hear myself say it, and because sometimes the only thing between you and complete collapse is the sound of your own voice making a promise you are not sure you can keep. The first bus arrived at 4:47. I stepped to the curb with one hand raised, the other flat against my stomach. The doors opened and warm air rolled out like a small miracle. I stepped up, touched my card to the reader, and heard the sound I had been dreading. A flat, indifferent beep. Insufficient fare. The driver, a heavy-set man in his mid-40s name tag, reading Gerald, looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen, with the efficiency of a man who had made this calculation many times and stopped finding it uncomfortable. "Fare's $2, ma'am. You're short." I looked past him at the bus. 22 people. A woman with her eyes on her phone. A man watching the snow like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. A young mother whose eyes met mine for one brief second before sliding away. Not one of them moved. I said, "Please." The word cost me something. Gerald looked at his clock, his fare box, everything except my face. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. I walked back to the pole and put my shoulders against it because my legs were shaking. 20 minutes passed, maybe more. Time does strange things when you are cold enough. I could feel my body making the decisions bodies make when something matters more than comfort. My knees buckled once. I caught the pole with both hands and hung there, head down, breath coming in short white clouds. Then at the far end of the block, headlights appeared through the snow. I let go of the pole. I straightened up with everything I had left. I raised one hand. I was still standing. Marcus Bear Higgins told me later that he almost missed the stop entirely. The snow had been coming down since 4 in the afternoon, not the soft decorative kind that makes Chicago look like a postcard, but the mean horizontal kind that comes off Lake Michigan with a personal grievance and reduces visibility to whatever is directly in front of your headlights. He was running 11 minutes behind, nursing the bus through intersections that had gone glassy with ice, watching the road, the way a man watches something he does not entirely trust. Then his headlights swept the corner of 55th and Halsted. He told me it was not me he noticed first, it was the light. A cold silver flash from my collar, five-pointed, barely the size of a thumbnail there, and gone in under a second as the beam moved past. His hands tightened on the wheel before his mind had finished forming the thought. He knew that star. Not because he had seen it recently, because it had been living in him for 21 years in the particular place where the things that change your life are stored permanently and without your permission, below thought, below language, in the body itself. In the spring of 2001, Marcus had been pinned down in a bad situation on the west side, the kind that happens when your intelligence is wrong and your position is already compromised. He had been closest to the door. He had been the one in the open. My father, Arthur Vance, had stepped in front of what was coming toward him, not heroically, not with a speech, simply with the quiet decisiveness of a man whose body had already made the decision before his mind caught up. The shot caught Arthur in the shoulder. He went down hard, cursing with considerable creativity, and Marcus caught him, and they spent the next several minutes on the floor of that building, with Arthur bleeding and furious, and Marcus unable to speak. Later at the hospital, Marcus had pressed a small spool of silver tactical thread into my father's hand, the kind the unit used for marking gear in low visibility. "Sew it somewhere you'll always have it," he had said, "so I can find you in the dark." My father laughed, that full room-filling laugh. "Bear," he had said, "you are the most sentimental man alive who would absolutely deny being sentimental." Marcus had denied it. He had meant every word. 3 years later, my father was dead, and Marcus had carried the weight of that silver thread for 2 decades, a small, bright point of grief that never went fully dark. Now he was staring at it on the collar of a stranger barely holding herself upright at a bus stop in a February storm. He hit the brakes. The bus shuddered to a stop mid-block. He was down the steps before he had consciously decided to move the doors still swinging behind him, the cold rushing in to replace him. I was gripping the pole with both hands. Head down, shoulders heaving with the effort of breathing air that hurt. He reached me in 4 steps and put one steadying hand on my shoulder. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rough, unsteady in a way that surprised him. "I've got you." I looked up. My face was raw, wet with snow and tears, both my eyes exhausted and fierce. All at once, the eyes of someone running on the very last of everything and refusing to stop. Marcus looked at my face, then at the collar. "Arthur's girl," he said quietly. His voice broke on the second word. He stripped off his own coat without answering my confusion, wrapped it over my shoulders on top of my father's, and guided me up the steps. Then he went back to the driver's seat, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he had not called in 5 years. Raymond Miller picked up on the second ring. "Bear." A pause, careful and alert. "It's been a while." "I know." Marcus kept his eyes on the road, watching me in the front row pull both coats tight with shaking hands. "Raymond, I found Arthur's daughter. She's pregnant. And whatever happened to her tonight, it was not an accident." A short silence. Heavy. "Where are you?" Raymond said. The heater on bus 1147 was losing its argument with the cold outside, but it was producing enough warmth that I had stopped shaking quite so violently. I watched him glance at me in the rearview mirror. I had pulled both coats tight around my shoulders and sat with one hand pressed flat against my stomach, my eyes fixed on the windshield, using sheer concentration as a substitute for strength. "She's tough," Marcus said quietly into the phone. "She's Arthur's kid. She can travel." He heard Raymond exhale a long, slow breath that carried 20 years of something Marcus did not have a name for. Guilt, maybe, or the particular weight of a debt that has been sitting on your chest so long you have stopped noticing it until the moment it shifts. "I'll have the lights on," Raymond said. "Drive safe, Bear." Marcus ended the call. He dropped the phone in the cup holder and drove. In the front row, I turned my head and looked at him. My face was still raw from the cold, my eyes red-rimmed, but my voice when I spoke was steadier than he expected. "You called someone named Raymond," I said. "And someone named Cross. Who are they?" "People who knew your father," Marcus said. "People who owe him." I absorbed that. My jaw tightened slightly. "How many people owe my father?" "Enough," Marcus said. "More than you know." I turned back to the windshield. Outside, the snow was still coming down the city, moving past in orange and white. The storefronts of Woodlawn sliding by one after another, the laundromat, the church with the marquee sign, the corner store with the metal grate already pulled halfway down for the night. I watched it all with the particular attention of someone memorizing things, storing them away, as if I understood that tonight was a before and after, and I wanted to remember exactly what the before looked like. Raymond Miller lived in a 2-story brick house on Dorchester Avenue that looked from the outside exactly like every other 2-story brick house on Dorchester Avenue. There was nothing about it that announced itself. No security cameras visible, no reinforced door, no external indication that the man inside was the chief of police of the city of Chicago and had been for the past 7 years. That was the point. Marcus pulled up to the curb and cut the engine. Every light in the front of the house was on. Raymond had been as good as his word. Before Marcus could get out of his seat, the front door opened. Raymond Miller was 60 years old, broad-shadowed with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that had been serious for so long it had forgotten it had another setting. He was wearing a sweater and slacks, which meant Marcus had caught him at home for the first time in possibly years, and he was already moving down the front steps. Before the bus doors opened, his breath making clouds in the cold air, his eyes going immediately to me in the front row. Marcus helped me down the steps. I moved carefully, one hand on the railing, the other on my stomach, and when my feet hit the sidewalk, I straightened up and looked at Raymond with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and wariness, the look of someone who had run out of reasons to trust people tonight, but had not yet run out of need. Raymond stopped at the bottom of his steps. He looked at my face. Then his eyes dropped to the coat, to the collar, to the small silver star barely visible beneath the folds of Marcus's coat, still wrapped around my shoulders. Something happened to Raymond Miller's face then that Marcus had never seen happen to it before. The seriousness did not leave it, never left. It was architectural load-bearing, but something beneath it shifted, cracked open just slightly, like light coming through a wall you thought was solid. Raymond's eyes went bright. He pressed his lips together hard. His hand came up and gripped the porch railing, knuckles going pale. "Raymond," Marcus said quietly. Raymond nodded once, sharp, getting himself back. He cleared his throat and looked at me directly. "My name is Raymond Miller," he said. "I was your father's commanding officer for 4 years and his friend for 11. I should have done more to protect him." His voice was rough at the edges, scraped down to something honest. "I am going to spend whatever time I have left making sure that debt gets paid. Starting tonight, please come inside." I stared at him. My chin trembled just once before I locked it down. My eyes went glassy and furious at the same time, the way eyes get when a person is fighting with everything they have not to fall apart in front of strangers. "My father is dead," I said. My voice cracked on the last word like a bone under pressure. "He's been dead for 20 years and nobody ever told me the whole truth about why." "I know," Raymond said. He did not look away. "Come inside. I'll tell you everything. All of it. Tonight." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Marcus. Marcus gave me the smallest nod he had. I walked up the steps. The inside of Raymond Miller's house smelled like coffee and old wood and something underneath both of those things that I could not name until I sat down at his kitchen table and realized it was the smell of a place where serious people had sat and had serious conversations for a very long time. The kitchen was plain. A table, 4 chairs, a window above the sink that looked out onto a backyard buried in snow. On the wall beside the refrigerator, A photograph 8 men in tactical gear squinting into a sun I could not see somewhere that looked flat and hot and very far from Chicago. I found my father in the back row before Raymond finished pouring the coffee. Third from the left, younger than I ever knew him, grinning like he had just won something. My throat tightened so sharply it hurt. Dr. Jonathan Cross, a lean, quiet man in his 60s with steady hands and the unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough emergencies to know that panic was never the most useful response, had arrived 12 minutes after we did. He had checked my blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat with a small handheld device he pulled from a worn leather bag, and told me in a calm, measured voice that everything looked stable, that I needed warmth and fluids and rest, and that the baby was, in his professional opinion, extremely unimpressed by the evening's events but otherwise perfectly fine. I had laughed at that. A short, broken sound, more air than humor, but it had loosened something in my chest that needed loosening. Now Cross sat at the end of the table with his coffee, and Marcus sat to my left, and Raymond sat across from me with his hands wrapped around his mug, and the photograph on the wall behind him, and I looked at all three of them and said, "Tell me." Raymond set his mug down. "Charles Sterling ordered your father's death," he said. No preamble, no softening, just the words placed on the table between us like something heavy being set down after a long carry. 20 years ago, your father was building a case against Sterling's real estate operation, land seized from public housing developments laundered through city contracts connected to 3 aldermen and a federal judge. It would have been the biggest corruption case this city had seen in 30 years. I stared at him. My hands were flat on the table. I could feel my own pulse in my palms. "Sterling found out," Raymond continued. "He paid a crew to set up the ambush. It was made to look like a routine operation gone wrong. Wrong intelligence, wrong location, wrong outcome." His jaw tightened. "It was not wrong. It was designed." "You knew?" My voice came out sharp enough to cut. "You knew this and you didn't." "I suspected," Raymond said, and the word landed like a confession. His eyes did not flinch from mine, but the pain in them was real and old and not recently acquired. "I suspected, and I could not prove it. And by the time I had enough to move on, the evidence had been managed and the witnesses had been managed, and Arthur had been dead for 4 years." He paused. "That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. I know the difference." My eyes were burning. I pressed the heels of my hands against them hard, absolutely refusing to cry in front of these men right now. There would be time for that later. There would be oceans of time for that later. Right now, I needed to hear all of it. "Julian," I said. "Tell me about Julian." Marcus made a sound beside me, low, involuntary, the sound of a man who already knows the answer to a question and does not enjoy it. Raymond nodded slowly. "The Sterling family knew who you were before Julian ever spoke to you. Charles Sterling identified you as a potential liability when you were 24 years old and started working in financial audit. He was concerned that you might eventually develop the skills and the access to find what your father had found. He folded his hands on the table. Julian was instructed to get close to you, to monitor you, to ensure that if you ever came close to anything dangerous, it could be contained." The word contained went through me like a cold wire. "He didn't love me," I said, not a question. Not really, more like saying something out loud that I had known in my body for longer than I had known it in my mind. "I don't know what Julian feels," Raymond said carefully. "I know what Julian did. And I know that the night you found those files, he called his father before he called you." I thought about Julian standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, not meeting my eyes, running numbers. My stomach turned over. "There's something else," Raymond said. He stood and walked to the counter, opened a drawer, and came back with a manila envelope that was old enough to have yellowed at the edges, sealed with a strip of tape that had been applied and removed and reapplied so many times it had lost most of its adhesive. He set it in front of me. On the front, in my father's handwriting, the handwriting I knew from birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the kitchen counter, were 2 words: "For Clara." My breath left my body. He left it with me 3 weeks before he died, Raymond said quietly. He told me to give it to you when the time was right. Raymond's voice roughened. I have been arguing with myself about when that was for 20 years. I think tonight qualifies. My hands were shaking as I picked up the envelope. Shaking badly, trembling in a way I could not control, and I did not try to control it because some things deserve to be felt completely. I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a small USB drive. I unfolded the paper. Clara, it began in his handwriting, and I had to stop and close my eyes for 3 full seconds before I could continue. If you are reading this, then the thing I was afraid of has happened. I am sorry I could not protect you from it. I tried to prepare you for it instead. The numbers on the drive are the foundation. You will know what to do with them. You always understood numbers better than I did, even when you were 12 years old, correcting my checkbook and pretending you were not enjoying it. A sound came out of me, half laugh, half sob. Marcus put his hand over mine on the table without saying a word, and I gripped it hard and kept reading. The coat will bring you to the right people. The right people will bring you to the truth. And the truth, that part I leave to you. I always trusted you more than you trusted yourself. I love you, baby girl. Finish what I started. Dad. I folded the letter. I pressed it against my chest with both hands. And then finally, in Raymond Miller's kitchen with the snow still falling outside, and my father's handwriting warm against my sternum, I let myself cry. Not the broken, frightened crying of the sidewalk an hour ago. Something deeper than that. Something that had been waiting 12 years for a room safe enough to come out in. Raymond did not tell me to stop. Marcus did not tell me it would be okay. Cross quietly refilled my water glass. They just stayed. All 3 of them. Present and steady, the way my father had taught them to be. When I finally looked up, my eyes raw and my chest hollow, and something in me cleaner than it had been in a long time, I looked at Raymond and said the only thing that made sense. Tell me everything Sterling has. Every asset, every account, every name. I straightened in the chair. I need to know what I'm taking apart. Raymond looked at me for a long moment. Then, for the first time since I had walked through his door, he smiled. Arthur said you'd say something like that, he said. Raymond made the call at 7:43 in the morning. I sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me and listened to him tell the city of Chicago that Clara Vance, 29 years old, 7 months pregnant, had been reported missing by her husband, Julian Sterling, the previous evening, and had not been located despite an overnight search. That given the weather conditions, 15 degrees heavy snowfall, no phone, no wallet, authorities were deeply concerned for her welfare. That anyone with information should call the tip line immediately. He delivered every word in the flat, careful voice of a man reading from a script, which he was because I had written most of it myself at 2 in the morning on a legal pad Raymond had found in his desk drawer. When he hung up, he looked at me across the table. It's done, he said. As far as the world is concerned, you are gone. I nodded. I picked up the coffee. It was cold, and I drank it anyway, because I had learned in the past 12 hours that you take warmth wherever it is available in whatever form it comes. How long do we have before they start looking harder? I asked. Sterling will wait 48 hours, Raymond said. Charles is cautious. He'll want confirmation before he moves the assets. He won't believe you're really gone until he has reason to. Then we have 48 hours to give him reason, I said. Marcus, who had been leaning against the kitchen door frame with his arms crossed and the expression of a man doing calculations he did not entirely like, cleared his throat. Clara, you just had the worst night of your life. The baby is fine, but you are not fine. Cross said you need rest. Cross said I need rest and fluids, I said. I've had fluids. I'll rest when Sterling is in a federal holding cell. I looked at Marcus steadily. You told me my father trusted you. Prove it. Help me. Marcus looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the ceiling. Then Marcus uncrossed his arms and said, What do you need? The answer to that question took 3 days to fully articulate and 2 weeks to begin executing, but the first piece was simple. I needed to get inside Sterling Enterprises. The building was a 40-story glass tower in the West Loop with a revolving door and a security desk and a cleaning crew that came in every night at 10 and left at 6 in the morning. Raymond found me the contract company. Marcus drove me to the uniform supply store in Bridgeport, where I bought 2 sets of gray work clothes, a pair of rubber-soled shoes, and a baseball cap that I pulled low over my face. I dyed my hair the following Tuesday, dark brown, almost black, a shade so different from my natural color that when I looked in the bathroom mirror of Raymond's house, I genuinely startled myself. "You look different," Marcus said from the doorway. "That's the idea," I said. He handed me a pair of glasses with clear lenses and thick frames. "Cross found these. Said they'd change the shape of your face enough to matter." I put them on. I looked in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was not Clara Vance, chief financial officer, wife of Julian Sterling, resident of a glass and marble house in Lincoln Park. She was nobody in particular. She was a woman in gray work clothes with dark hair and sensible shoes, who cleaned offices for a living and whom nobody looked at twice. The uniform was loose-fitting by design, the kind worn by workers who spent long shifts on their feet, forgiving enough in the cut that even at 7 months moving with purpose in dim corridor light, I could pass for someone who had simply gained weight. Nobody looks twice at the cleaning crew. That was the whole point of the cleaning crew. Good, I thought. Good. I started on a Wednesday. The first night I did nothing except learn the layout of the building, which corridors connected to which, where the cameras were positioned, which floors the security guard skipped on his rounds because they were always empty after midnight. The second night I located Julian's office on the 31st floor and spent 40 minutes going through his filing cabinets with gloved hands, finding nothing I did not already know. The third night I left the notebook. It was a Dollar Tree composition book, the kind that cost exactly $1, and came in packs of 3 with a black and white marbled cover that was completely unremarkable in every possible way. I had filled the first 12 pages with what appeared to any reasonable observer to be a cleaning employee's personal grocery lists and household budget notes, amounts in the $10 and $20 range, written in deliberately messy handwriting, the kind of record a person keeps when they are trying to make ends meet and tracking every dollar matters. What the numbers actually represented was something considerably different. Every figure on those pages was a coded reference to a Sterling shell company, a transfer amount, a date, or an account number from the USB drive my father had left me. Compressed, transposed, disguised as the most boring possible document in the most boring possible cover. A dollar store notebook sitting on the desk of a man who had never once in his life had to worry about whether he could afford groceries. I left it on the corner of Julian's desk at 12:47 in the morning, angled slightly toward the window, the way a person might leave something they intended to pick up later. Then I went to clean the 32nd floor and waited. At 1:15, Julian came in. He was not supposed to be there. He had not been there any of the previous 3 nights. But there he was, rumpled suit loosened tie, the slack-reddened face of a man who had been drinking steadily for several hours, and had come back to his office for reasons that probably made sense to him at the time. I was in the corridor when I heard the elevator. I pressed myself back against the wall cart in front of me, head down, cap pulled low. Julian walked past me without a glance. His eyes were on his phone. He pushed open his office door, went inside, and I heard him drop into his chair with a long exhale that contained within it the entire weight of a man who had done something he could not undo and was only now beginning to understand what that cost. I waited. 3 minutes later, I heard him laugh. Short, contemptuous, the laugh of a man who has found something beneath his notice. I heard the soft thud of something being tossed aside. I counted to 60. Then I walked past his door, glanced in through the glass panel, and saw the notebook sitting on the edge of his desk, exactly where I had left it, slightly askew now from being picked up and dropped. Julian was at his computer, scrolling, absorbed, already forgetting he had touched it. I kept walking. I did not allow myself to smile until I was in the stairwell with the door closed behind me. Then I smiled so wide my face hurt, and I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall and put both hands on my stomach and whispered to my daughter, who was awake and kicking with what I chose to interpret as enthusiasm. Your grandfather was right, I told her. Numbers don't lie, and neither do men who think they've already won. At 6 in the morning, Marcus was waiting outside in the old Buick with the heat running. I got in. He handed me a coffee without speaking, which was one of the things I had come to appreciate most about Marcus Higgins. He understood that sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was hand you something warm and not ask questions until you were ready. Well, he said when I had taken 3 sips. I looked out the windshield at the pale gray morning, the city waking up around us, the Sterling building rising above the other rooftops, with its glass face catching the first flat light of a winter dawn. Sterling just signed the transfer papers, Raymond's text had said 40 minutes earlier. All of them. Every asset in your name is now in Julian's name. They think you're gone. I had typed back 2 words. Good. Continue. It's working, I told Marcus now. He nodded slowly, pulled into traffic. And the notebook. Julian thinks it's a grocery list, I said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he started to laugh, a low rolling sound that filled the car and fogged the windows slightly, and was, I realized, the first time I had heard him laugh since the night he pulled me off that bus stop pole. It was a good sound. It sounded like the beginning of something. My baby came 6 weeks early on a Tuesday at 3:17 in the morning, and she announced her arrival the way she would apparently announce everything, thereafter loudly, decisively, and on a schedule that suited nobody but herself. I had been asleep on the narrow bed in the back room of Raymond's house when the first contraction hit, and it hit with the particular ferocity of something that had been waiting patiently for the right moment, and had decided at 3 in the morning in the middle of February that this was it. I sat up so fast I knocked the water glass off the nightstand. It shattered on the floor. I did not care about the glass. "Marcus!" I shouted. My voice bounced off the walls of the small house with a force that surprised even me. "Marcus, I need Cross right now." There was a thud from the room across the hall. Marcus moving faster than a man his size had any right to move, and then he was in the doorway in a sweatshirt and socks, taking one look at my face and reaching for his phone simultaneously. "How far apart?" he said. "I don't know. They just started, but they are not gentle about it." I stopped as another one rolled through me, white-hot and insistent, and grabbed the bedpost with both hands and squeezed until my knuckles went pale. "Call Cross," I managed through my teeth. "Call him now." Marcus was already dialing. Dr. Jonathan Cross arrived in 19 minutes, which, given the road conditions and the hour, was either a miracle or evidence that he had been sleeping in his car. He came through the door with his leather bag over one shoulder and his coat still half on, took one look at me, took one look at Marcus, and said, in the calm, unhurried voice that I had come to understand was simply how he operated at all times, regardless of circumstances. "All right, let's see where we are." Where we were, it turned out, was further along than anyone had expected. The next 4 hours were the hardest thing I had ever done, and I say that as a woman who had spent the previous 3 weeks cleaning office buildings in disguise while 7 months pregnant and planning the financial dismantlement of one of Chicago's most powerful families. Labor was different. Labor did not care about your plans or your intelligence or your determination or any of the things you had decided made you capable. Labor simply required you to be present in your body in a way that left no room for anything else, and my body, which had been through considerable violence in the past several weeks, was not in a cooperative mood. I cried. I swore. I said things to Marcus that I later apologized for, and he later claimed not to remember, which was generous of him, and almost certainly untrue. I called out for my mother, who had died when I was 9, and for my father, who had died when I was 16, and in the particular delirium of the final hour, I was not entirely certain they were not in the room. Cross delivered her at 7:41 in the morning. She was small, 6 pounds 2 ounces, which Cross said was excellent for 6 weeks early, and she had a full head of dark hair and her grandfather's nose, and the loudest cry I had ever heard from something that size. And when Cross placed her on my chest, I stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. "Hello," I whispered. My voice had nothing left in it. It came out scraped and raw and completely inadequate for the occasion. "Hello, I'm your mother. I'm so sorry about last night." She stopped crying, just for a moment, as if she had heard me and was considering her response. Then Cross's voice changed. Not dramatically, just a shift in register, a tightening of efficiency that I recognized from my days auditing companies in trouble. The sound of someone who has found a problem and is already moving to address it before they finish identifying it. "Marcus," he said. "I need Raymond. Now." I looked up. Cross was checking the baby with rapid, practiced hands, his face composed, but his eyes moving fast. "What's wrong?" My voice came out sharp, the exhaustion burning off instantly. "What's wrong with her?" "Her color isn't where I want it," Cross said. "She needs blood. It's precautionary, but it's not optional." He looked at me directly. "Her blood type is Rh null. Do you know what that means?" I knew what it meant. I had audited a hospital system 3 years ago and had read enough pathology reports to understand that Rh null was the rarest blood type in the world, fewer than 50 known donors globally, and that finding a match in an emergency was not a matter of calling the blood bank. My heart dropped through the floor. "How do we find a match?" Marcus demanded from the corner, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Raymond can call." "I'm already here," the voice came from the doorway. The woman standing there was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a coat she had not yet taken off and carrying a bag that suggested she had packed for the possibility of staying. She had the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions were made and had long since stopped being impressed by the weight of them. Her eyes went to the baby first, then to me, then to the coat folded on the chair beside the bed, to the collar, to the star. And something in her face went very still in the way that faces go still when they encounter something they have been expecting for a long time. "My name is Evelyn Stone," she said, already removing her coat and rolling up her sleeve. "I am a federal judge. I have Rach Null blood, and Arthur Vance stood in front of a bullet for me in 1998. She looked at Cross. "Tell me what you need." Cross stared at her for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. 20 minutes later, Evelyn was sitting in the chair beside my bed with a bandage on the inside of her elbow, watching Cross monitor the baby with the focused, proprietary attention of someone who had just made a personal investment in the outcome. The baby's color was improving. Her cry when it came was strong and indignant and absolutely magnificent. I looked at Evelyn. "You came because of my father." "I came because Raymond called me," she said. "But yes, because of your father." She folded her hands in her lap. "He was the first person in 20 years of courtrooms and cases who I genuinely believed was trying to do the right thing with no calculation behind it. When he died, I—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I have been waiting for a way to be useful ever since." I looked down at my daughter. At her dark hair, her closed eyes, her small fists curled against her cheeks, like she was ready to fight something even in sleep. "Zora," I said quietly. The name I had chosen months ago alone without telling anyone. Because it meant life, and because it belonged to a woman who had spent her life telling the truth when the world preferred comfortable lies. "Her name is Zora." Evelyn looked at her. A slow smile crossed her face, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and does not need an audience. "Your grandfather never got to meet you," I whispered to my daughter, my voice dropping to something only she could hear. "But he made sure you would be safe. He made sure all of this would be here when you needed it." My chest ached with a fullness that had no clean name. Now I have to make sure the people who took him from us can never do this to anyone else. Zora opened her eyes. Dark, unfocused, ancient-looking, the way all newborn eyes are ancient-looking, as if they have just come from somewhere with a longer memory than the world they have arrived in. She looked at me like she already knew everything, and was simply waiting for me to catch up. Before I go any further, drop a 9 in the comments so I know you're still here with me. Because what Clara is about to do next, nobody saw it coming. And just so you know, the story ahead contains some fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. If that's not for you, this is your moment to step away. But if you stay, it gets so much better. 7 months is not a long time to build something that is meant to last. But 7 months is a very long time to be invisible. And invisibility, I had learned, was its own kind of power. The world thought I was dead. Julian had moved into a penthouse on Michigan Avenue with Chloe Bennett, a 26-year-old with excellent cheekbones and a talent for being in the right place at the right time, which was the charitable interpretation of how she had gone from Julian's personal assistant to the woman wearing his grandmother's ring in the space of 4 months. Charles Sterling had quietly absorbed every asset that had been in my name. Victoria had redecorated. They had closed the chapter on me with the efficiency of people who had closed chapters before and expected no further correspondence from the pages they had discarded. They were about to be very surprised. Evelyn Stone was the first piece. She came to Raymond's house on a Thursday afternoon in March, 3 weeks after Zora was born, and sat across from me at the kitchen table with a leather portfolio that she opened without ceremony to reveal a single page of numbers that made me sit up very straight in my chair. "This is the Arthur Vance Memorial Fund," she said, tapping the page with one finger. "Your father's life insurance, his pension, his government survivor benefits, and the wrongful death settlement that Raymond negotiated privately with the city in 2006, the one you were never told about because you were a minor, and the terms included a confidentiality agreement that was, as it turns out, legally questionable in its application to a direct heir." She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "I have been managing this money for 19 years, investing it conservatively, reinvesting the returns, keeping it clean and legal, and completely documented." She slid the page toward me. "This is what it has become." She anticipated my next question before I could ask it. "The settlement was structured through a court-appointed legal guardian. After your father died, you were 16, and Raymond made the decision to shield the funds from any party connected to Sterling until you were old enough and positioned to use them safely. By the time you reached the majority, you had already moved into Sterling's orbit." She paused. "He waited too long. He knows that. But the money waited with him untouched, and here it is." I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. My mouth went dry. "Evelyn," I said carefully, "this is enough," she said simply. "It is enough to do what needs to be done. Your father was not a wealthy man, but 19 years of compound interest in diversified index funds, managed by someone who had reasons beyond professional obligation to ensure its growth." She closed the portfolio. "He would have found the whole thing somewhat ironic, I think." I laughed, despite myself. A real laugh, the first one in longer than I could calculate. "He would have called it overkill." "He would have been right," Evelyn said. "He usually was." She stood, straightened her jacket, picked up her bag. "The money is yours. Use it carefully. Use it carefully. Use it legally. And use it to end this, my girl, not just for yourself." She left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the single page of numbers in front of me, and Zora asleep in the bassinet beside me, her small chest rising and falling with the peaceful regularity of someone who had not yet learned that the world required vigilance. I picked up my pen. I began to plan. The strategy was not complicated because the best strategies never are. Sterling Enterprises was a publicly traded company, which meant its vulnerability was public, visible on any stock exchange terminal, accessible to any buyer with sufficient capital and sufficient patience. Charles Sterling had never worried about a hostile acquisition because he had spent 30 years making sure the Sterling family controlled enough shares to make the prospect untenable. What he had not accounted for was a buyer who was not interested in a takeover. A buyer who simply wanted to own enough to make noise. I needed 30%. That was the threshold for forcing a special shareholder meeting. That was the number that turned a ghost into a problem. I bought through 7 different holding companies registered in 7 different states, each one acquiring small positions over several weeks at intervals designed to avoid triggering the reporting thresholds that would have flagged the purchases to Sterling's legal team. Evelyn handled the legal architecture. Raymond provided the intelligence which of Sterling's institutional investors were underwater, which funds were looking to exit their positions quietly, which brokers could be trusted to execute without asking questions. Marcus drove me. Every morning, every evening, every late-night meeting with Evelyn's lawyers or Raymond's contacts, or the forensic accountant Raymond had found in Milwaukee, who specialized in exactly the kind of corporate structure Sterling had built, and who had, upon reviewing the USB drive from my father, used the word magnificent in a tone that suggested he meant it as both a compliment and an indictment. Marcus drove me to all of it. He had left the CTA in March 3 weeks after Zora was born, filing his own termination paperwork, with a level of thoroughness that his supervisor had apparently found baffling. "You wrote your own termination letter," I had asked him when he told me. "More detailed than anything they would have written," he said, completely unapologetic, settling into the driver's seat of the old Buick with the particular comfort of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. I needed to be free to do this, and I needed it to be clean. No loose ends. I looked at him. "You gave up your pension." "Arthur gave up more than that for me," he said. "He put the car in drive. Don't make it into something bigger than it is." But it was something bigger than he was admitting, and we both knew it, and I loved him for pretending otherwise. By October, I owned 31% of Sterling Enterprises. I knew the exact moment Charles Sterling found out because Marcus and I were sitting in the Buick outside a coffee shop on Wabash Avenue when my phone buzzed with a Google alert, my own name attached to a news aggregator that Raymond had set up to monitor Sterling's media mentions. The alert was a filing, a required SEC disclosure triggered by the 30% threshold. Route Victory Foundation, LLC, had acquired a material position in Sterling Enterprises. The filing was dry and technical and absolutely required by law. I read it twice, then I showed it to Marcus. He read it. A slow smile spread across his face. Not the big rolling laugh from the car 3 months ago, but something quieter and more dangerous. The smile of a man watching a chess piece arrive exactly where it was supposed to be. "He knows," Marcus said. "He knows," I agreed. My phone buzzed again. A different alert, a photograph pulled from Sterling's corporate social media. Charles Sterling at a board meeting taken that morning. He was standing at the head of a conference table with his phone in his hand, and even in the low resolution of a social media photograph, even at a distance, and through glass, the expression on his face was unmistakable. He was not angry. Not yet. He was something worse than angry. He was afraid. "Good," I said quietly. I put the phone in my pocket. Through the windshield, the Sterling building caught the October light and threw it back in long gold strips across the street below, indifferent and gleaming exactly as it had always been, not for much longer. "Drive," I told Marcus. "We have work to do." I did not need to destroy Julian Sterling. I just needed to introduce him to Chloe Bennett and then get out of the way. Chloe was by any objective measure extremely good at being Chloe. She was 26 years old, relentlessly photogenic, and possessed of the particular intelligence that expresses itself not in the accumulation of knowledge, but in the reading of rooms. She understood immediately what a situation required of her, and delivered it with a precision that other people mistook for charm. She had been Julian's personal assistant for 14 months before I was pushed out into the snow, which meant she had been in that role for approximately 8 months before Julian started looking at her the way men look at things they have decided they want and have not yet decided how to acquire. I had known about Chloe before the night of the files. I had chosen not to care because caring would have required a level of emotional investment in Julian that I had quietly stopped making sometime around our 2nd anniversary when I realized that the man I had married and the man who existed were not the same person and never had been. What I had not known until Raymond's contacts began compiling information in March was the precise shape of Chloe's ambition. She wanted money. She wanted status. She wanted to move through the world in the way that very wealthy women move, with the specific ease of people for whom doors open before they reach them. Julian was a vehicle for all 3 of these things, and Chloe had strapped herself into that vehicle with the focused determination of a woman who intended to arrive at her destination regardless of what happened to the driver. This made her, from my perspective, extraordinarily useful. The intermediary was a woman named Patricia Osei. A financial consultant Raymond knew from his days on the Joint Task Force, sharp and discreet, and motivated by a fee that Evelyn's lawyers had structured as a legitimate consulting engagement. Patricia's job was simple. She would approach Chloe through a mutual contact in the real estate world, establish a casual professional relationship over the course of several weeks, and then, at the appropriate moment, mention as if in passing, as if it were merely gossip between colleagues, that she had heard from a source at the SEC that certain Sterling Enterprises subsidiaries were about to become the subject of a regulatory review that could result in their assets being frozen pending investigation. Patricia delivered this information on a Wednesday evening over drinks at a bar in River North. I know exactly how Chloe reacted, because Patricia, who had been doing this kind of work for 15 years and had learned the value of documentation, was wearing a recording device. Frozen. Chloe's voice on the recording was sharp, immediate, all the practiced warmth stripped away in an instant. Which subsidiaries? The ones in the Nevada and Delaware registrations, from what I understand. Patricia said, her voice carefully casual. I could be wrong. I probably shouldn't even be saying this. No, which ones specifically? Patricia named 7 companies. They were the 7 companies that represented the core of Sterling's liquid operating capital, the ones through which Julian moved money most frequently, the ones whose assets, if transferred out of Julian's name before any regulatory action, would represent a significant personal windfall for whoever held them. There was a pause on the recording that lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which I imagined Chloe doing the same kind of rapid financial calculation that I would have done, that my father would have done, that anyone with a working understanding of asset protection would have done. Thank you, Chloe said. Her voice had changed again, smoother now. Deliberate, the voice of a woman who has made a decision and is already 3 steps into executing it. This has been really helpful. The drinks ended shortly after that. Chloe called her personal lawyer from the cab on the way home. I know this because Raymond had the cab company's records, which showed the call duration at 11 minutes and 40 seconds, long enough for a preliminary conversation about asset transfer mechanisms and the timeline for drafting transfer documents. She moved fast. I had expected that. What I had slightly underestimated was how fast. Within 48 hours, she had the documents prepared. Within 72, she had presented them to Julian. Marcus was parked outside the penthouse on Michigan Avenue when it happened. He did not see the conversation. He was in the car, not in the room, but he saw Julian's face when Julian came out onto the balcony at 9:30 in the evening with a glass of scotch, and stood there for a long time, looking out at the lake with the particular stillness of a man who has just signed something and is not entirely sure why. She told him the transfer was protective. Raymond told me afterward, relaying what his source inside the Sterling legal office had reported, that she was looking out for both of them, that it was temporary just until things stabilized. Raymond paused. Julian believed her. Of course he did, I said. Julian believes the story that requires the least self-examination. 3 days later, Charles Sterling's financial team ran their quarterly review and discovered that 7 of the company's most critical operating subsidiaries had been transferred out of Julian's name and into Chloe Bennett's personal holding company. Charles Sterling called Julian at 11:47 in the morning. Marcus told me about this call because he happened to be outside the building when Julian came out 30 minutes afterward, and the state of Julian's face told its own story. He was pale, not the ordinary pale of a man who has received bad news, but the specific bloodless pale of a man whose body has redirected its resources away from his face, because it has determined that other systems currently require them more urgently. His hands were shaking. He walked to the corner and stood there for a moment with his hands pressed flat against the side of the building, as if he needed it to hold him up. Then he got in a cab. The cab went to Chloe's apartment building on Dearborn Street. I know what happened next because the building's security footage, which was later subpoenaed by Agent Walsh's team as part of the federal financial fraud investigation, showed Julian arriving at Chloe's door at 12:22 in the afternoon. He knocked. She opened it. He pushed past her into the apartment. The door closed. What came through it muffled but audible to the neighbor in the adjacent unit, who later mentioned it to the building's front desk staff in passing, was the sound of Julian Sterling losing the carefully maintained composure that had served him his entire adult life all at once, in an apartment that belonged to a woman who had just legally acquired 7 of his family's most valuable companies, and who was at the precise moment of his arrival on the phone with her own lawyer discussing the timeline for her upcoming prenuptial agreement with Julian, which she had decided needed to be considerably more detailed than previously planned. I was at Raymond's kitchen table when Marcus texted me. Julian just went into Chloe's building, face like he swallowed something alive. I looked down at Zora, who was lying on a blanket on the floor, batting at a mobile that Marcus had assembled from parts he found at a dollar store. It was already October. She was 8 months old now, growing stronger every day, while our trap quietly closed around the Sterlings. She had recently discovered that making noise produced reactions from the adults around her, and had decided this was the most entertaining thing in the world. Julian's new woman, Chloe, I said to her conversationally, is about to learn that greed is only a strategy until someone greedier comes along. Zora grabbed the mobile and yanked it sideways with a shriek of delight. I typed back to Marcus Good. Let me know when he leaves. Then I picked up my daughter, who smelled like baby shampoo, and the particular warmth of someone who has been sleeping somewhere safe, and held her against my chest, and felt for the first time in 8 months something that was not strategy or planning or controlled forward motion, but something simpler and more animal than all of those things. Satisfaction. Julian found me on a Tuesday in October. I had been expecting him for 3 weeks. The recording device had been ready for 6. It was a small thing disguised as an analog clock, the kind with a white face and black numbers, that you can buy at any pharmacy for $12, the kind so ordinary that it becomes invisible the moment it is placed on a surface because the eye slides past ordinary things in search of something worth noticing. Raymond had sourced it. Cross had tested it. It transmitted in real time to a server that Evelyn's legal team had arranged with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, which had been building its own case against Sterling Enterprises for 4 years, and had been waiting. Raymond told me for exactly the kind of corroborating evidence that a scared man talking too much in a hospital room might provide. Evelyn had secured a Title III judicial authorization order 3 weeks earlier, which rendered the recording admissible under federal law, regardless of Illinois consent statutes. Everything that happened in that room would be clean documented and unimpeachable. I had placed it on the nightstand 3 weeks ago. Every morning I checked that it was still transmitting. Every night I went to sleep with the small red light blinking in the dark like a heartbeat. Marcus was outside the door. He had been outside the door every night for 8 months, and he would be outside the door tonight, and I trusted that the way I trusted very few things completely, without qualification, the way you trust the ground under your feet. I heard Julian in the corridor before he reached the room. Not his voice, he was not speaking yet, but his footsteps, which I had lived with for 3 years, and knew the way. You know, a sound that has been present in your daily life long enough to bypass conscious recognition and go straight to the body. A particular rhythm, a particular weight. My stomach tightened. I sat up in the bed, adjusted the blanket over my legs, and looked at Zora in the bassinet in the corner. She was asleep on her back with her arms flung wide in the absolute physical surrender of an 8-month-old who has had a full day and intends to recover fully from it. Her chest rose and fell. Her lips were slightly parted. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. The red light was steady. The door opened. Julian looked terrible. I want to be precise about this, because I had spent considerable mental energy over the past 8 months imagining this moment, and in most of those imaginings Julian had looked polished and controlled, the way he always looked, the way his family had spent decades teaching him to look composed, expensive, impenetrable. The man who walked through my door looked like none of those things. His suit was good but wrinkled in a way that suggested he had been wearing it for too long. His eyes were red at the rims. There was a tension in his jaw that I recognized as the physical residue of too many difficult conversations and not enough sleep, and his hands, when he pushed the door shut behind him, were not entirely steady. "Good," said a cold, clear voice somewhere in the back of my mind. "Good. Let him feel some of it." He saw me. His face moved through several things quickly. Relief, guilt. something more complicated than either. And then he crossed the room and stopped at the foot of the bed and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He looked ashamed. "Clara," he said. His voice was rough, scraped down to something uncharacteristically honest. "You're alive." "Evidently," I said. He flinched, just slightly. "I looked for you. After I looked. I didn't know. Julian." I kept my voice very even, very quiet. The voice of a woman who has nothing left to prove and therefore nothing left to perform. "Why are you here?" He pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, hands clasped in front of him. He stared at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up at me with the desperate sincerity of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is now discovering that the rehearsal and the reality are two entirely different experiences. "I made a mistake," he said. "I made a catastrophic, unforgivable mistake, and I have not slept properly since February, and I need you to know that what happened that night, my parents, the way they—" He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. "My father told me it was necessary, that you'd found the files, and that if you went to anyone, the SEC, the FBI, anyone, it would destroy everything we'd built. He said it was the only way." His voice cracked on the last word. I believed him. I stood there, and I believed him, and I let them. He put his face in his hands. I watched him. My chest was a sealed room. Whatever was in it, grief, fury, the residue of 3 years of a marriage that had been a performance from one side, I had locked it somewhere. It could not reach the surface tonight, because tonight required clarity, and clarity required distance, and distance was the one thing I had spent 8 months learning to maintain. "Julian," I said quietly, "look at me." He looked up. His eyes were wet. He was crying in the effortful, reluctant way of men who have been taught that crying is a concession, squeezing tears out against their own resistance. "Did you know," I asked, "before that night? Did you know what your father had done to get the land contracts? Did you know about the shell companies before I found the files?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I knew there were structures," he said. "Things that had been set up before I came into the business. My father said they were standard practice, that everyone in the industry operated the same way that it was. Did you know?" I said again, each word deliberate and separate, "that your father had a man killed to protect those structures?" The color left Julian's face so completely and so quickly that for a moment I thought he was going to faint. He gripped the arms of the chair. His mouth moved without producing sound. "What?" he whispered. "Arthur Vance," I said. "My father. He was building a case against your family's land operations 20 years ago. Your grandfather arranged for him to be killed." I watched Julian's face as the information landed, cataloging each reaction with the detached precision of someone who no longer had the luxury of being surprised by what people were capable of. "Your father knew. He has known his entire adult life, and he built an empire on top of it." Julian made a sound that was not quite a word, something raw and involuntary that came from somewhere below language. "I didn't." He lurched forward, grabbing the bed rail with both hands, his knuckles white, his eyes frantic. "Clara, I swear to you, I did not know about that. I knew the books were wrong. I knew there were things I wasn't supposed to ask about, but I would never have." His voice broke completely, splintering apart in a way that would have moved me once in a different life, in a version of this story, where I still believed that what he felt and what he did were connected. "Please, tell me what I can do. I'll give you everything, the accounts, the access codes. I'll testify against my father. "Julian," I said gently. "Stop." He stopped. He was breathing hard, chest-heaving, tears running openly down his face now without any attempt at containment. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at the clock on the nightstand. The small red light blinked steadily in the dim room. "I think," I said, "that you've already said everything that needs to be said." He stared at me, confused, still raw, not yet understanding. He would understand later, when his lawyer called him, when the FBI called his lawyer. When the transcript of this conversation arrived as Exhibit 47 in a federal indictment that covered 31 counts of fraud tax evasion conspiracy, and the conspiracy resulting in the death of Arthur James Vance, a law enforcement officer actively cooperating with a federal investigation at the time of his death, committed in the city of Chicago on a March evening 20 years ago when the cherry trees on the boulevard were just beginning to blossom. He would understand then. For now he just looked at me, and I looked back at him, and the clock on the nightstand kept its quiet, faithful time. "Thank you, Julian," I said softly to the room, to the record, to the man my father had been before any of this began. My father always said that numbers don't lie. I glanced at the clock one last time. Turns out neither do scared men. Gerald Pitts had not slept properly in 8 months. Not since the night he drove away from a woman standing in the snow with one hand on her stomach and 75 cents between her and the cold, and 18 people on a warm bus who had seen everything and done exactly what Gerald had done, which was nothing, which was the thing that cost nothing in the moment and everything afterward. He had told himself the usual things, that it was not his job, that the policy existed for a reason, that he had a schedule to keep and a record to protect, and 23 years on the job that he could not afford to compromise for one fare on one night on one route that nobody important rode anyway. He had told himself these things so many times and with such consistency that for the first 2 weeks after Valentine's Day, he had almost believed them. Then the dreams started. Not nightmares exactly, just a door, a bus door closing, and on the other side of it a face young, exhausted, one hand raised not in anger, but in something worse than anger, something quieter and more permanent. A woman who had looked at 18 people and understood in the specific way that people understand things that go very deep, that not one of them was going to help her. Gerald woke from this dream at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in March and lay in the dark of his apartment on the northwest side and stared at the ceiling and understood with a clarity that 8 months of self-justification had not been able to produce, that he was not a bad man who had done a bad thing. He was an ordinary man who had made a calculation and chosen the wrong side of it. The distinction he was discovering did not make sleeping any easier. Special Agent Dana Walsh of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division came to his door on a Thursday afternoon in November. She was 40-something, compact, with the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that urgency, when performed, produces worse results than patience. She showed him her badge. She asked if she could come in. She accepted the offer of coffee and sat at his kitchen table with a notepad and a voice recorder and the particular quality of attention that makes a person feel, for better or worse, genuinely seen. "Mr. Pitts," she said, "I want to talk to you about a phone call you received on February 14th of this year." Gerald's stomach dropped 6 inches. He had known this was coming. He had known it since the morning after Valentine's Day when he woke up and replayed the call in his head and understood that what he had taken for an anonymous tip about a difficult passenger was on reflection something considerably more organized than that. The voice on the phone had been male professional and had offered a specific amount, $3,000, transferred to an account number that had been texted to him 30 seconds later, in exchange for ensuring that a woman matching a specific description did not board Route 63 that evening. That, Gerald had told himself, it was not a bribe. He had told himself the woman probably owed someone money and the caller was a debt collector. He had told himself many things while he watched $3,000 appear in an account he had opened 6 years ago and never used and had almost forgotten he had. He had not touched the money. That at least was true. It had sat there for 8 months like something radioactive, and every time he thought about moving it, he found he could not bring himself to, as if not spending it was the last thread of a morality he was trying not to let go of entirely. "I received a call," Gerald said now to Agent Walsh at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold in front of him and his hands folded on the tabletop to keep them from moving. "The evening of February 14th, a man called and told me—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. He made himself continue. "He told me to make sure a specific woman did not board my bus that evening. He described her. He transferred money to an account. Agent Walsh wrote something on her notepad. Her expression did not change. Did you comply? Gerald looked at his hands. She tried to board, he said. She was 75 cents short. I used the fare as the reason to deny boarding. He paused. I knew she would have no way to dispute it. It was a legitimate rule. I used a legitimate rule to do something that was not legitimate. He heard himself say it and felt the specific, irreversible relief of a true thing finally leaving the body that has been holding it. Agent Walsh pushed a photograph across the table. It was a still from a security camera high angle, slightly grainy, the timestamp reading 9:47 p.m. on February 14th. It showed a marble foyer, a woman in an expensive coat, two security guards, and between them being steered toward a door, a younger woman in a plain coat with her arms wrapped around herself and one hand pressed flat against her stomach. Gerald looked at the photograph for a long time. He had not known that night that the woman at his fare box was the same woman in this photograph. He had not known she had been pushed out of her own home by her husband's family into 15-degree weather with no phone, no money, and 7 months of pregnancy. He had not known any of that. But he had known she was cold. He had known she was pregnant. He had known she was scared, and he had closed the door anyway. Mr. Pitts, Agent Walsh said quietly, this is bigger than a bus fare. Gerald pushed the photograph back across the table. His eyes were burning in a way that had nothing to do with the overhead light. His throat felt like something was caught in it that he could not swallow past. I know, he said. His voice came out rough and too small for the room. I've known since February. He reached across the table and picked up Walsh's pen without asking. Tell me where to sign. Walsh shook his hand at the door. She said he had done the right thing. He did not feel that he had done the right thing. He felt that he had done the necessary thing, which was different, and that the gap between those two descriptions was a measurement of the 8 months he had waited to do it. He drove Route 63 that evening, the afternoon shift, the same route, the same stops, the same sequence of faces getting on and off in the early dark of a Chicago November. He drove it the way he had driven it for 14 years, efficiently, on time, without drama. When he reached 55th and Halsted, he pulled to the stop and opened the doors and let 3 passengers off and 2 on, and then before he closed the doors and pulled back into traffic, he looked out at the corner. There was a shelter there now. Glass panels on 3 sides, a roof overhead, a bench along the back wall, a light inside that made it look warm even from a distance. Root Victory Foundation had funded it. He had read about that in the community paper, along with the story of how it had come to exist, though the story in the paper was considerably less detailed than the truth. Gerald looked at the shelter for a long moment. At the bench inside it, where a woman was sitting with 2 grocery bags and a tired face waiting for the next bus in warmth and light, instead of standing in whatever the sky was doing. He thought about the woman with 75 cents. He thought about the door he had closed. He thought about the $3,000 still sitting in an account he had never touched, earning interest he would never use, waiting for a decision he had not yet made about what a person does with money they should never have accepted. He pulled the lever. The doors closed. The bus moved forward. He did not look at the clock. The Sterling legal team arrived at my last known address at 9 in the morning, with a search warrant, 12 associates, and the confident energy of people who expected to find something. They left at 11:45 with nothing because nothing was there. I know the precise timeline because Raymond had a contact at the building management company who texted him updates every 15 minutes, and Raymond forwarded each one to me, and I read them at the kitchen table in the house on Dorchester Avenue, while Zora sat in her high chair eating mashed sweet potato, with the focused intensity of someone engaged in serious professional work. 9:02 team arrived. 12 people plus 2 evidence technicians. 9:47. They've been through every room. Nothing. 10:15. Lead attorney made 3 phone calls. Looked unhappy during all 3. 11:44. They're leaving. One of them kicked a wastebasket on the way out. I read the last message and set my phone face down on the table and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of something that felt very much like joy before picking the phone back up and getting back to work. The evidence was not in the office. The evidence had not been in the office for 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago, Raymond had sourced 6 used medical transport vans, the kind operated by small private companies that contract with insurance providers to take elderly patients to dialysis appointments and follow-up visits, the kind of vehicles so unremarkable in the urban landscape that the eye categorizes and dismisses it in under a second. Each van had been fitted with a compact server unit bolted beneath the rear passenger bench, concealed behind the standard medical equipment storage panels that came with the vehicles from the factory. Each server held one encrypted partition of the total evidence archive, the shell company documentation, the transfer records, the forensic accounting analysis, the USB drive data, the recorded conversations, all of it divided into 6 portions that were meaningless in isolation and complete only when assembled. The vans ran their regular routes. Dialysis patients were transported to their appointments and home again. The servers hummed along beneath the bench seats, doing their quiet work, going nowhere, that any search warrant could follow, because search warrants require addresses, and the vans did not have addresses, they had routes, and the routes changed daily. Marcus had designed the system. He had spent 3 evenings at Raymond's kitchen table with a legal pad and a map of the city, working out the logistics with the methodical patience of a man who had spent 30 years thinking about how to move things safely through difficult terrain. When he presented it to me, I had looked at the diagram for a long time. "Bear," I said. "This is genuinely brilliant." He shrugged. "Arthur used to say the best hiding place is somewhere everyone can see." I thought about that. Then I thought about my father 20 years ago, hiding his evidence in a manila envelope in a police evidence room where it sat untouched for 2 decades because nobody knew to look for it. Not hidden in a safe, not encrypted on a server, just present in plain sight in a place so obvious that it became invisible. "He was right," I said. "He usually was," Marcus said, and picked up his coffee. By the time the Sterling lawyers were kicking wastebaskets in my empty office, I had already submitted the filing. 31%. The threshold crossed. The special shareholder meeting formally requested. Root Victory Foundation, LLC, registered in the State of Illinois nonprofit status mission statement, focused on community health transportation and legal aid services for underserved populations, had formally notified Sterling Enterprises' board of directors that it was exercising its rights as a material shareholder to demand an extraordinary general meeting within 60 days. The filing was 3 pages long. It was written in the specific dry language of corporate governance that is designed to be boring and is, in fact, the most dangerous kind of language in the world because it looks like paperwork and functions like a weapon. Evelyn had reviewed every word. Charles Sterling's response was immediate and, according to Raymond's contact inside the Sterling legal office, extremely loud. He called an emergency board meeting the same afternoon the filing arrived. Raymond's contact, a junior paralegal who had been feeding information to Raymond for 4 months in exchange for assistance with a visa application that the Sterling firm had been inexplicably slow to process, reported that Charles had arrived at the conference room 14 minutes late, which had apparently never happened before in 20 years of board meetings, and that when he walked in, his face was the color of old concrete and his hands were balled into fists at his sides. "He threw the filing across the table," the paralegal texted Raymond. "Actually threw it. Papers went everywhere." Raymond forwarded the message to me with a single comment. "Rattled." I showed it to Marcus, who was driving me back from a meeting with Evelyn's lawyers on the north side. "Good rattled or bad rattled?" Marcus asked. "Rattled, rattled," I said. "The kind that makes people do things they wouldn't do if they were thinking clearly." Marcus nodded slowly. He changed lanes, checking the mirrors with the automatic thoroughness of someone who had spent decades watching what was behind him. "And Julian, I said, is a different problem." Julian had been a different problem since October, since the hospital room, since the night he had sat across from me and unraveled himself in front of a recording device. The FBI had been careful they had not moved, had not tipped their hand, had continued building the case with the patient architecture of a prosecution that intended to be airtight. Julian did not know he had confessed. Julian did not know that his words from that night existed in a federal evidence file 4 inches thick. What Julian knew was that Root Victory Foundation owned 31% of his family's company, and that his father was throwing documents across conference tables, and that Chloe, who he had apparently hoped would be an ally in this crisis, had hired her own lawyer and stopped returning his calls. Raymond had told me Julian had been at his computer for 18 hours straight the previous Wednesday, running searches, pulling corporate filings, tracing ownership structures with the frantic energy of a man who suspects something but cannot make the shapes resolve into a picture. At some point during those 18 hours, he had found what he was looking for. I know this because Raymond's contact sent a message at 2:47 in the morning. He found it. He searched Root Victory Foundation. He's looking at the registration documents. I was awake when the message came. I had been awake since midnight, feeding Zora, sitting in the chair by the window with the city lights, making orange patterns on the ceiling, doing the mental calculations that had become as automatic and constant as breathing over the past 8 months. I read the message twice. Then I typed back, "How does he look?" The response took 4 minutes. When it came, it was 3 words. Like a ghost. I put the phone down on the windowsill. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always does at 3 in the morning, which is breathe slow and steady, the particular rhythm of a city that never fully stops, just shifts into a lower register when the people who run it in the daytime give way to the people who clean it, drive it, keep it moving through the hours when nobody is supposed to be watching. I looked at Zora. She had fallen back to sleep in my arms, warm and heavy and completely unconcerned with the state of Sterling Enterprises' corporate governance. Julian had read my name 3 times. I knew he had read it 3 times because people always read something 3 times when they cannot believe what they are seeing, when the name on the document is a name that should not be there, a name that belongs to someone the world has been told is gone. In the morning he would tell his father. His father would tell the lawyers. The lawyers would file motions and issue statements and make calls to people in positions of authority who owed Charles Sterling favors, and the machine that had been running for 30 years would begin its last attempt to protect itself. But tonight at 3 in the morning, Julian Sterling was sitting alone at a computer staring at my name, and I was sitting in a chair with my daughter asleep in my arms, watching the city breathe, and I was not afraid of any of it. Not even a little. Raymond Miller had a saying he kept to himself for 19 years. Arthur never left a room without leaving something behind. I had heard that phrase exactly once the night Raymond slid the manila envelope across his kitchen table. I had not understood it then. I understood it now, standing at the corner of 55th and Halsted at 11:42 at night. Zora strapped against my chest in a Navy carrier, the cold February air biting at my cheeks, the way it always did in this city when it wanted to remind you it was still in charge. Marcus stood 3 feet to my left, hands in the pockets of his heavy canvas jacket, eyes scanning the street with the quiet discipline of a man who had spent 22 years learning how to watch without being watched. He had not said a word since we parked the Buick 2 blocks east. He did not need to. Raymond said the 3rd maintenance panel from the north end. I said, my voice low and even. "3rd one," Marcus confirmed. He did not move yet. He watched a city bus roll through the intersection, its headlights sweeping the sidewalk, and waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner before he took a step toward the shelter wall. The bus stop at 55th and Halsted had been rebuilt 7 months earlier, funded in part by a Root Victory Foundation community infrastructure grant that Evelyn Stone had quietly approved through a city council subcommittee. The new structure had reinforced aluminum side panels, LED, lighting strips running along the interior ceiling, and a recessed maintenance corridor behind the north-facing wall, accessible only with a coded panel key that the city's transit authority kept on file. Raymond had a copy of that key. He had made it himself the week the shelter was installed, because my father had told him in 2002, during a night shift outside a warehouse on Cottage Grove Avenue. "If something happens to me, Raymond, look under the station. Not the one they build tomorrow, the one they'll build after." My father had known even then that something might happen to him. He had known the way men who work close to dangerous secrets always know, not as a premonition, but as a calculation. He had done the math on Charles Sterling's patience years before Charles Sterling had done the math on him. Marcus slid the panel key into the recessed lock with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment 11 times in an empty parking garage on the south side. The panel released with a soft hydraulic click. I stepped forward, one hand pressed flat against Zora's back, feeling the steady rhythm of my daughter's breathing against my palm. The space behind the panel was 18 inches deep and roughly 4 feet wide. It smelled of concrete dust and cold metal. On the left side, wedged between two aluminum support beams with a strip of weatherproof adhesive tape, was a fireproof document box, gunmetal gray, approximately the size of a hardback novel. My father's initials AV were etched into the top right corner with something sharp, probably a pocket knife. I reached in and pulled it free. My hands did not shake. I had expected them to. I had prepared a small internal speech for the moment when emotion might override function, a trick Raymond had taught me during the months of planning. Name what you feel, then set it on the shelf, then work. I felt grief. I named it. I set it on the shelf. I worked. Marcus resealed the panel and we were moving again within 90 seconds. Back at the Dorchester safe house, Evelyn Stone was already at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and a pot of black coffee she had made 40 minutes earlier. Dr. Jonathan Cross sat across from her reviewing a document on his tablet, his reading glasses pushed up into his salt and pepper hair. Raymond stood by the window the way he always did when he was anxious, arms folded, watching the street. I set the box on the table. No one reached for it. They waited for me. I entered the 4-digit code my father had written in the final line of his letter the year I was born in reverse, and the box released with a soft mechanical exhale. Inside was a single sealed envelope, a USB drive with a red stripe of electrical tape around it, a handwritten index card, and a photograph. The photograph showed 6 men in plain clothes, standing outside a building I recognized immediately as the Sterling Capital Group headquarters on Michigan Avenue. The photo was dated October 17, 2001. Charles Sterling stood at the far left, one hand in his jacket pocket. My father stood at the far right, looking directly at the camera, with an expression that was not a smile and not a frown, but something quieter and more resolved, the face of a man who had already decided. Between them stood 4 other men. I recognized 2 of them. A state senator who had retired in 2015, citing health reasons, and a federal judge who had died in a car accident in 2009. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 9 words. They all signed it. The document is on the drive. Evelyn Stone took off her reading glasses and set them on the table. Her voice when she spoke was the quiet, measured voice of a woman who had spent 31 years in federal courtrooms and had learned that the weight of a moment was best honored with precision rather than volume. "That drive," she said, "if it contains what I think it contains, is a RICO predicate document. It establishes the enterprise, the pattern, and the participants. All 3 elements." Raymond turned from the window. "How long to verify?" 48 hours, Evelyn said, maybe less. Marcus, who had not spoken since we left the bus stop, pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at me across the table, and there was something in his expression that I had not seen before. Not pride exactly, and not relief, but the particular quality of a debt that was very close to being paid. "Your father," Marcus said carefully, "spent 3 years building that box. He told me once that he was not trying to destroy anyone. He was trying to make sure that when the time came, the right person was holding the right evidence in the right room." He paused. "I think he knew that person was going to be you." Zora stirred against my chest, made a small sound, and settled back into sleep. I looked at the photograph one more time. At my father's face on the far right of the frame. At the expression that was not a smile and not a frown. I understood it now. It was patience. It was the face of a man who had already won. He had simply been waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I slid the USB drive across the table to Evelyn Stone. 48 hours, I said. Then we schedule the meeting. The invitation had been printed on cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering, the kind of stationery that announced its own importance. Before you had read a single word, Julian Alexander Sterling and Chloe Marie Bennett request the honor of your presence at their celebration of marriage. February 14th. The Fairmont Chicago Millennium Park. Black tie. 7 o'clock in the evening. I had received my copy through an intermediary, a paralegal at Evelyn Stone's firm who had a contact inside the Fairmont's event coordination office. I had not been invited. That was precisely the point. I read the invitation, once set it flat on the kitchen table next to Zora's cereal bowl, and said nothing for 11 seconds. Then I picked up my coffee cup and finished what was left in it. "You sure about tonight?" Marcus asked from the doorway. He was already dressed dark charcoal suit, no tie, the kind of quiet elegance that announced nothing and communicated everything. "I have been sure about tonight," I said, since February 14th, 2 years ago. The Fairmont's Grand Ballroom held 340 guests. I knew this because Raymond's contact inside the event team had provided a full seating chart, a vendor schedule, and the names of all 17 security personnel working the floor. I also knew that the hotel's audiovisual system had been contracted to a firm called Meridian Event Solutions, a company whose sole registered officer was Patricia Osei, the same intermediary who had delivered the SEC rumor to Chloe Bennett 4 months earlier. Patricia had spent 6 weeks preparing what she referred to in her precise and unhurried way as a standard corporate presentation package. It was in fact a 47-slide deck containing the complete Root Victory Foundation, filing the SEC shareholder disclosure showing a 31% stake in Sterling Enterprises, a timeline of the 6 shell companies, and $31 million in diverted funds. And on the final slide, a scanned copy of the photograph from my father's fireproof box. 9 signatures visible at the bottom of the document on the USB drive, now verified and authenticated by Evelyn Stone's team within 39 hours. The deck was loaded onto the Fairmont's presentation system at 4:58 in the afternoon, embedded inside a folder labeled Sterling Family Tribute Video, Do Not Open Before 8 p.m. No one opened it early. People rarely open things that told them not to. I arrived at the Fairmont at 7:22, not as a guest and not as staff. I arrived as a shareholder. Evelyn Stone had filed the extraordinary general meeting request that morning, citing the Root Victory Foundation's 31% stake and invoking a provision in Sterling Enterprises' corporate charter that required any shareholder holding more than 25% to be formally notified of any transaction exceeding $50 million. The Sterling family's recent restructuring, triggered in part by Chloe Bennett's subsidiary transfer, had crossed that threshold by $11 million. The notification had been served to Charles Sterling's personal attorney at 9:15 that morning. The attorney had called Charles. Charles had called Julian. Julian had gone very still in the way that men go still when they realize they have been outmaneuvered, not at the last moment, but at every moment, and that the person who outmaneuvered them had been several steps ahead since the beginning. The wedding proceeded. I had not come to stop a wedding. I had come because the law required Sterling Enterprises to acknowledge my foundation's shareholder status in a formal setting, and the formal setting that happened to be scheduled for February 14th at 7 o'clock in the evening was the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Chicago Millennium Park. I sat in a chair near the east wall of the lobby, Evelyn Stone beside her, in a charcoal blazer, Raymond Miller standing 6 feet to my right. Marcus was outside in the Buick. Zora was with Dr. Cross at the Dorchester safe house, presumably asleep by now, one small fist curled under her chin the way she always slept. At 8:02, the lights in the Grand Ballroom dimmed for the tribute video. At 8:03, the first slide appeared on the 12-foot screen behind the head table. I did not go inside. I did not need to. I could hear through the closed ballroom doors the precise moment when 340 people in black tie realized that the video they were watching was not a tribute to the Sterling family, but an itemized accounting of everything the Sterling family had taken and from whom they had taken it. I heard it in the way sound changes when a room full of people stops making noise all at once. Evelyn Stone looked at her watch. The SEC liaison is outside with a federal notice, she said. Charles Sterling's attorney will receive it in approximately 4 minutes. Good, I said. There will be photographers in the lobby within the hour, Evelyn added. Once this breaks publicly, it will move quickly. It's already moved, I said. We just let it arrive. The ballroom doors opened and a wave of noise spilled into the lobby. Not panic, not shouting, but the particular chaotic murmur of people who had dressed for a celebration and found themselves inside a disclosure. A woman in a silver gown walked quickly past without looking at anyone. 2 men in tuxedos stood near the coat check speaking in urgent clipped sentences into their phones. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses stopped in the middle of the lobby, looked around at the sudden disorder, and simply stood there holding the tray level with both hands as though stillness might help. Julian Sterling came through the ballroom doors at 8'11", bow tie, loosened face, the color of old ash. He stopped when he saw me. I did not stand. I did not move toward him. I simply looked at him with the same calm, level expression I had been practicing, without knowing I was practicing it, for the past 2 years. Clara, he said. His voice had the quality of something that had been rehearsed and then forgotten at the moment of delivery. Julian, I said. He looked at Evelyn Stone. He looked at Raymond Miller. He looked back at me, and something shifted in his face. Not anger, not calculation, but a species of recognition that arrived as it always does too late to be useful. I didn't know, he said. About your father. I need you to know that. You knew enough, I said. The recording confirms what you knew and when you knew it. Your attorney has a copy, so does the FBI. Julian opened his mouth and closed it again. Behind him, through the open ballroom doors, the final slide was still visible on the 12-foot screen. The photograph. 6 men outside Sterling Capital Group headquarters, October 17, 2001. My father on the far right, patient, and already decided. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I picked up my bag. Tell your father, I said quietly, that the shareholder meeting is scheduled for March 3rd. Root Victory Foundation will have 3 agenda items. He should bring his attorneys. I walked toward the lobby exit. Raymond fell into step beside me. Evelyn Stone followed unhurried, the way people move when they have already won and see no reason to perform urgency they do not feel. The cold outside hit my face the way February cold in Chicago always does, immediate and specific, like a correction. I breathed it in. It felt for the first time in 2 years entirely bearable. Marcus had the Buick running at the curb. He looked at me through the windshield as I came down the steps, and even from that distance I could read his expression clearly. I got in. The door closed. Done, Marcus asked. Almost, I said. I looked straight ahead through the windshield at the empty February street. Drive. I want to get back to Zora. Marcus pulled away from the curb without another word. Behind them, the Fairmont Chicago Millennium Park blazed with light. Marcus had been driving the same streets for 26 years. He knew them the way a person knows a language they learned before they learned to read, not by rule but by feel, by the particular rhythm of a route that had been walked and driven and walked again until the pavement itself became a kind of memory. He knew which intersections held their ice longest in February. He knew which streetlights flickered on the Dan Ryan and which ones had been dark so long the city had stopped pretending to fix them. He knew the sound the Buick made when it was cold, and the sound it made when it was warm, and the precise difference between the two. He had not known 2 years ago that driving would become something other than a job. He had not known that a silver star on a coat collar at a bus stop in a snowstorm would redirect the final chapter of his life as completely as a bullet in a warehouse on Cottage Grove Avenue had redirected the middle of it. He knew now. Charles Sterling left the Fairmont at 8:31 through the service exit on the south side of the building, the way men who have spent 30 years controlling the front door instinctively retreat to the back when the front becomes complicated. He had sent his attorney ahead in a town car and arranged a second vehicle for himself, a black stretch limousine registered to a hospitality company that Charles had used for private transportation since 2007. The driver, a man named Dennis, who had worked for Charles for 11 years, was waiting at the service entrance with the engine running and the partition glass raised. Raymond's contact inside the Fairmont security team had relayed Charles's exit route at 8:27. Marcus received the message through the earpiece he had been wearing since 7 o'clock. He said nothing. He adjusted his route by 3 blocks, took a left on Wabash, and positioned the Buick at the corner of Wabash and Balbo with a clean sightline to the service exit. "He's coming out," Marcus said. "I did not look up from the document on my lap, I know. You want to follow?" "We follow," I said. "Raymond's team takes the intercept point at Michigan and 18th. We stay back." "Understood." The limousine pulled out of the service exit at 8:34. Marcus gave it a half block and then pulled onto Wabash, 2 cars back, unhurried, invisible, in the ordinary stream of late-evening Chicago traffic. Charles Sterling sat in the back of the limousine with a glass of bourbon he had poured himself and not yet drunk. He was 67 years old. He had built Sterling Enterprises from a regional real estate holding company into a diversified financial entity with interests in 9 states and 4 foreign markets. He had navigated 2 recessions, 1 federal investigation that went nowhere, and 30 years of the particular social arithmetic required to maintain the kind of wealth that does not merely exist, but actively perpetuates itself. He had not navigated this. He knew what the photograph meant. He knew what the USB drive contained. He had known in the way that men who bury things always know that buried things have a tendency to surface. He had simply calculated incorrectly, as it turned out that the person most likely to find them would not be a 29-year-old woman who had been thrown out of his son's house in a snowstorm 7 months pregnant. He had miscalculated me because he had not considered my father. He was considering my father now. The limousine stopped at the light at Michigan and 18th. Charles looked out the tinted window at the lakefront, at the black February water, beyond the seawall, at the city lights, reflected in it in long, broken columns. He picked up the bourbon glass and set it back down without drinking. The partition between the passenger compartment and the driver's seat slid down 3 inches. "Mr. Sterling," Dennis said from the front, his voice carrying the particular careful neutrality of a man delivering news he would have preferred not to deliver. "There are 2 vehicles blocking the intersection ahead. One of them has federal plates." Charles was quiet for 4 seconds. "Pull over," he said. Raymond Miller was standing on the sidewalk at Michigan and 18th when the limousine rolled to the curb. He was wearing a dark overcoat and no expression worth reading. Behind him, Agent Dana Walsh of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division stood with 2 field agents, all 3 in plain clothes, a federal arrest warrant folded in Walsh's inside jacket pocket, where it had been since 3:30 that afternoon. Marcus parked the Buick half a block north and cut the engine. I watched through the windshield as Raymond approached the limousine's rear door. I watched the door open. I watched Charles Sterling step out onto the sidewalk in his black tie and his Italian shoes, and his 67 years of accumulated calculation, and I watched the precise moment when Agent Walsh produced the warrant and began to speak. Charles did not run. He did not argue. He stood on the sidewalk at Michigan and 18th at 8:41 in the evening of February 14th, and listened to Dana Walsh recite the charges with the particular stillness of a man who had finally run out of next moves. Marcus exhaled slowly beside me. "That's it," he said. "It was not a question." "That's the beginning of it," I said. "The rest is the courtroom." I watched Raymond step back from the limousine as Walsh guided Charles toward the federal vehicle. Raymond stood on the sidewalk and looked north along Michigan Avenue, and even from half a block away, I could read the line of his shoulders, the specific quality of a weight that had been carried for 19 years, and was now, if not gone, then at least shared with a system large enough to hold it. Raymond turned and looked toward the Buick. He could not see me through the distance and the dark, but he nodded anyway, the way men nod when they are communicating something that does not require confirmation of receipt. Marcus watched him. "He's been waiting a long time for that." "So have I," said. So has Zora, even if she doesn't know it yet. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the careful voice he used when he was about to say something he had thought about for a long time and was only now finding the words for, "Your father would have let Raymond make that arrest alone. He always said Raymond needed to be the one to close it." I looked at the federal vehicle as it pulled away from the curb. I looked at Raymond still standing on the sidewalk watching it go. "I know," I said. "That's why I stayed in the car." Marcus looked at me. Something crossed his face quick and unguarded, the kind of expression a person cannot prepare in advance, and then he looked back at the road. He started the Buick. "Let's go get Zora," he said. "Yes," I said. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for the first time that evening. Outside, the city moved past the windows the way it always does, indifferent, continuous lit against the dark. Let's go home. The federal courtroom on the 14th floor of the Dirksen United States Courthouse was the kind of room that had been designed deliberately and with considerable architectural intention to make human beings feel small. The ceilings were 22 feet high. The wood paneling along the walls was the color of old authority. The gallery benches were hard and straight-backed, built not for comfort, but for attention. Every surface in the room communicated the same message, in the same quiet, absolute tone: what happens here matters, and you will conduct yourself accordingly. I had been in the room 4 times before the day of sentencing. I had sat in the gallery during the preliminary hearing. I had given my victim impact testimony on a Tuesday morning in November, reading from 3 pages of handwritten notes in a voice that did not waver once, while Charles Sterling sat at the defense table and looked at the surface of the wood in front of him. I had been present for the jury's return standing in the corridor outside because the gallery was full and had heard the verdict through the closed door: 12 counts, federal RICO statute, conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction, and 1 count of conspiracy resulting in the death of Arthur James Vance. Chicago Police Department badge number 447, who was actively cooperating with a federal investigation at the time of his death on March 9, 2003, a designation that brought the charge within federal jurisdiction and ensured it would remain in this courtroom, in this record, permanently. I had held Zora against my shoulder in that corridor and pressed my lips to the top of my daughter's head and said nothing at all. Today was sentencing. I arrived at 8:50 in the morning, 40 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. Marcus dropped me at the building's south entrance and went to find parking. Evelyn Stone was already inside, standing near the security checkpoint in a steel gray blazer, a leather document case under one arm, reading something on her phone with the focused calm of a woman for whom federal courthouses were simply offices with better acoustics. Raymond was in the gallery. I saw him as I came through the door's 3rd row from the front left side, the same seat he had taken at every hearing. He was wearing the dark overcoat and had his hands folded on his knees. He nodded when he saw me. Dr. Jonathan Cross was 2 seats to Raymond's right. Gerald Pitts was at the far end of the same row, sitting very straight, hat in his lap, looking at the floor in the particular way of a man who is doing penance, not because anyone has required it of him, but because he has required it of himself. I took my seat in the front row of the gallery directly behind the prosecution table. I had brought the coat. It was folded over my left arm, navy blue wool, 30 years old. The collar worn smooth at the edges from decades of hands reaching up to turn it against the wind. The silver 5-pointed star thread was still there, still intact, catching the courtroom light, the way it had caught the headlights of Bus 1147 on a February night 2 years ago. I had not planned to bring it. I had taken it from the closet that morning while Zora was eating breakfast and had stood holding it for a long time, longer than I intended, running my thumb along the star the way my father must have run his thumb along it when he sewed it there. I had thought about Arthur Vance, sitting at a kitchen table with a needle and a spool of silver thread, stitching a 5-pointed star into the collar of a coat he intended to give his daughter, saying to himself, or perhaps to the empty room around him, "It will be necessary." I had folded the coat over my arm and carried it out of the apartment without explaining it to anyone, because there was nothing to explain. It simply needed to be in the room. Charles Sterling was brought in at 9:34. He looked smaller than he had at the Fairmont, smaller than he had at any of the hearings, as though the months between arrest and sentencing had been quietly subtracting something from him that could not be restored. His attorney sat beside him, a thin man in a dark suit who had the expression of someone who had argued as well as the available facts permitted and knew it had not been enough. Julian was in the gallery on the defense side 3 rows back. He had agreed to a plea arrangement in October cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months federal supervision, no incarceration. I had not objected to the arrangement. I had told Evelyn Stone when asked that Julian's testimony was worth more to the case than his punishment was worth to me. I did not look at Julian when I came in. I was not indifferent. I simply had nothing left to feel in his direction that was worth the energy of feeling it. The judge presided. She read the sentencing guidelines. She acknowledged the cooperation of multiple witnesses. She noted with specific language that had been worked on for 3 weeks to ensure it would appear in the record the particular nature of the conspiracy, not merely financial fraud, but the deliberate orchestration of circumstances that had led to the death of a police officer and the subsequent 19-year concealment of that orchestration. She sentenced Charles Sterling to 22 years in federal prison. He would be eligible for review after serving 17. The courtroom was quiet for the 2 seconds that followed, the way courtrooms go quiet, when a number has been said that everyone present understands is real and final. I looked at the coat across my arm. I thought about a man I had never seen sew anything who had nonetheless sewn a silver star into the collar of a coat in the specific patient knowledge that it would one day be necessary. I thought about a bus stop in a snowstorm. I thought about the weight of Zora against my chest in a Navy carrier at 11:42 at night. I thought about a kitchen table and a manila envelope and a USB drive with a red stripe of electrical tape around it, and a photograph of 6 men and 9 signatures, and the particular expression on Arthur Vance's face, patient, already decided, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I did not cry. I had cried in private in the bathroom of the Dorchester safe house the night after Zora was born, and in the corridor outside the courtroom, on the day the verdict came in, and once very early in the morning, 3 months ago, sitting on the kitchen floor, with Zora asleep in the next room, and the coat laid out flat in front of me. I had given grief its time and its space and its due. I was not going to give it this room. When the session was called to close, I stood with everyone else. I folded the coat one more time precisely and held it against my chest. Raymond appeared at my shoulder. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at the coat the way he had looked at it the first night at his kitchen table, with the recognition of a man who understood exactly what he was seeing. "You're going to keep it," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "Good," Raymond said. He put a hand briefly on my shoulder light. Careful, the gesture of a man who had learned late in life that the right touch at the right moment is its own kind of language. He'd want you to keep it warm. I looked at the coat in my arms, at the silver star on the collar, steady and small and precisely where Arthur had put it. "I know," I said. "I intend to." I walked out of the courtroom into the corridor, the coat against my chest, the star catching the light one more time as I moved through the doors and into what came next. The auction ended at 10:23 on a Thursday morning in October. Evelyn Stone closed her bidding paddle, made one note in her legal pad, and did not otherwise react because Evelyn Stone did not react to things she had spent 14 months planning and fully expected to obtain. The 55th and Halstead property, the fleet of 12 vans, both of them ours. I exhaled. Quietly into the conference room, air among the folding chairs and the projector light, and the other bidders already moving toward the door. It was not a dramatic exhale. It was the exhale of a woman who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally set it down. Marcus, sitting one seat to my left, heard it. He did not look at me. He simply nodded once at the middle distance, We drove to 55th and Halsted at 11:15. Raymond was already on the sidewalk when we arrived, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the 4-story pale brick building, the way a man looks at something he has owed a debt to for a long time. Gerald Pitts parked behind us and got out, holding his hat against the wind. Dr. Cross came on foot from a clinic 3 blocks north. Evelyn arrived last and handed me the executed deed without ceremony. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The ground floor smelled of cold concrete and waiting. High ceilings, scuffed floors, afternoon light in long, pale rectangles across the room. I stood in the center of it and turned slowly. I could see exactly what it would become: the waiting area, the dispatch desk, the van bay in the rear. The wall where the letters would go. Route Home Community Transport. Founded in memory of Arthur James Vance. Marcus reached into his jacket and held out a small cloth-wrapped object. I unwrapped it. A replica of a Chicago Police Department detective badge, A. Vance, made by hand from an old photograph. A symbol of a debt finally paid in the only currency that mattered. "It goes on the wall," I said. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. I called home. I heard Zora's voice, bright, immediate, entirely itself. "I'm here, baby," I said. "I'll tell you about it when I get home." Then I laughed. Unguarded, warm, surprised by the sound of it. Raymond looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the snow. I looked at the wall. "I got it, Dad." They say family betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in a signed document in a closed door on a February night when the person who was supposed to protect you hands you a coat and calls it goodbye. I know, because that is exactly what happened to me. I won't pretend the family betrayal didn't break something. It did. But here is what I learned standing in that empty building on 55th and Halsted, holding my father's badge and my daughter's future in the same 2 hands. What breaks you open is not always what destroys you. Sometimes it is what finally lets the light in. My father used to say, "God doesn't waste a wound." I didn't understand that when I was standing in the snow with 75 cents and a baby I hadn't yet met. I understand it now. Every door that closed pushed me toward the one that was always meant to open. So let me say this plainly. Don't do what I did. Don't wait until you are thrown out into the cold to realize how much strength you were carrying all along. Don't let family betrayal convince you that you are the problem. And don't let family revenge become the whole story. Let it be the chapter that teaches you, then turn the page. Family revenge without purpose is just more pain wearing a different coat. What changed my life wasn't the moment Sterling fell. It was the moment I chose to build something where the damage used to be. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. Thank you truly for staying until the end. It means everything. And a quick note, the stories I share contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaning. If that style of storytelling isn't for you, that's completely okay. Find what speaks to you. But if you're still here, I'll see you in the next one.